Hey Mandy,
Hi, Lisa.
how's it going today?
It's good. Yeah, I'm excited to talk about this. I'm excited and nervous. I feel like that's how I am at the beginning of every
Excited and
podcast.
nervous. I'm excited and nervous too. Well, we're hitting on a topic that's real for all of us, and we don't like talking much about vulnerability. We don't like being vulnerable either, right? So,
Yeah.
of course, there's a bit of anxiety that comes up with the topic and excitement as well, because part of the excitement for me is us getting to know each other better and
hmm
share kind of our journey with this with our listeners. So, yeah. So, I'm excited you're going on vacation.
I'm excited as well
Yeah.
because I definitely need it. I think you and we both leave for vacation tomorrow, and it's
Yes.
probably long overdue.
Oh, so long overdue. I'm looking forward to seeing family. My Aunt Sally, Uncle Calvin, and Chrissy has booked some amazing little places in New York for us to
Chrissy
eat.
is your daughter, right? For
She's my
everyone listening.
daughter, and she is the more sophisticated side of me. She knows good food and where to find it and all that stuff. So she's scheduled places for us to dine well while we're in New York.
Oh,
So
very
I'm looking
nice.
forward to that and her birthday party and all that. So yeah.
We are definitely on opposite ends, because if it were up to my daughter and what we would eat, it'd be corn dogs and bagels with Nutella. So we're living. I'm very jealous
Yeah.
that you have a
Yeah.
sophisticated daughter, and I have
Well, she
one
wasn't
that's
always. Yeah, 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 yeah,
yeah.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Don't let that fool you. I'm like amazed myself at times. Like she's all last week, she's been sending pictures of every meal she's prepared, partly because I sent her a gift package from the garden. So,
Mm.
peppers and different types of tomatoes and squash and eggplants and stuff. So each evening she'll cook a meal using something that I sent her and take a picture. And I'm like, oh my gosh, this is amazing because
Oh.
okay, she doesn't cook a lot for us when she's home. So I said to her, when you come back, you've got, but when she was young, like your daughter, no, Chrissy barely ate. So
Yeah,
this is an evolution. So I'm
yeah,
excited for her. Yeah.
yeah.
So I'm looking forward to being with her in New York.
That'll be awesome.
Yeah, yeah. And her teaching me a thing or two. Being vulnerable so Chrissy can teach me stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Vulnerable. Even the word, just saying the word.
Yeah.
I gotta get in that good
You know what
space.
I do though, Mandy? I channel Brene Brown whenever the word vulnerability comes to mind or it's part of a conversation. I go back to listening to her, reading about her work, going into her research and stuff. And I mean, she's done so much amazing work around this to kind of change my own thinking about vulnerability. Now, having said that, I still have a little bit of a trembling with certain types of vulnerability and being vulnerable in certain settings and being vulnerable with certain people. But the more I make myself vulnerable, the better I get at being more vulnerable next time. Does that make sense?
Yeah,
So I
yeah.
instead of running away from it, I find myself leaning more and more into it. So how the heck did we come up with talking about vulnerability right after flourishing?
I'm guessing, and I'm kind of seeing the fruits of that labor of, I've the past few weeks, few months really, I've been in such a limbo of figuring out what I'm going to do next professionally and trying to lean into that not knowing
Mm-hmm.
because I feel very vulnerable when I don't have an answer. I feel like
Yeah.
I'm setting myself up for possibly getting an answer I don't want or
Mm.
failing. Um, but now it feels a little worth it. And maybe that's what we'll get into a little more is
Yeah.
it feels a little worth it because I've kind of figured out I'm ready for a new adventure and I'm ready for whatever is going to come my way at my role now.
Mm-hmm.
And it was a very ugly place to be in for a few weeks, a few months of not knowing.
Mm-hmm.
And just like what you just said,
Mm-hmm.
I think I do this, and I'm sure some of our listeners do, and maybe you do as well. But I sometimes run away from that vulnerability. I mean, like jet the other direction.
Absolutely.
And running towards it and embracing it is, I know it was necessary for growth. I guess that's what I'm getting at. I think it's necessary for growth. And if I'm not in that place, then I'm just not, you
Yeah.
know,
I remember last time you and I talked about, flourishing is all about, feeling good about where you are in your life. It's about, making meaning of the work that you do. It's the healthy connections. It's all of that. And, when you're not leaning into things that allows you to grow, right? That feeling of, oh, I'm floundering. I don't know what's going on. That's a miserable place to be. So you've done the work in kind of leaning into that and feeling the discomfort that comes with that. And it sounds like you're emerging from that.
yeah. And I'm
Or,
not there yet
yeah,
by any means, but I'm getting more comfortable in this discomfort.
yeah,
It's not as uncomfortable as it was in the beginning. Um, but
yeah.
I want to ask you, I did a quick Google search of vulnerability,
Mhm.
but I want to hear from you exactly what it is and what it shows up as. And
Yeah.
it's probably different for everybody. And I jotted down some of the places where I think I feel that. But what exactly is it when we're
Yeah.
talking about it?
And before I even answer that, one of the things I don't want us to overlook is something that you said is that you've gotten used to now to sort of lean into and feeling the vulnerability as a way to grow through it. So that's a really excellent tip for both of us and for listeners as well, that part of the way we become more vulnerable, which therefore allows us to flourish more in life, is to lean into the discomfort that comes with being vulnerable and being willing to commit ourselves to being more vulnerable, right? And so when I think, so let me sort of tell you where the whole vulnerability thing came from for me. So for the last several weeks, months, I've been struggling with getting a good night's sleep.
Yeah.
And I'm one of those folks where whatever challenges come my way, I'm going to figure out how to go over it, go around it, go under it, obliterate it, whatever it
Mm-hmm.
is,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yeah.
And so here is this thing that's been bugging me like crazy. And it's not just that I'm not getting a good night's sleep, and this is being consistent over time, is that it's now affecting my daily functioning, like getting tired when I'm like a go, go, go person. And that's frustrating, or not being able to do the kind of work I want to do at the level I want to do it because my energy just isn't there. Now I'm eating well, I'm working out, I'm hiking in the woods, I'm gardening, I'm doing all that stuff. And still the sleep thing, no matter what I do.
Yeah.
And so I'm in the woods hiking, and all of a sudden, so I'm sure I'm thinking about lots of stuff, but the word vulnerability just kind of wham, hit me front and center. What is this all about? So I started thinking about so many of my leaders and the teams they're leading and what they're struggling with. And I started thinking about what are some of the challenges that are facing them that they are not approaching in a way that's helpful. And then I'm thinking about my own self, and this sleeplessness is a challenge for me. How am I approaching it? Have I been really transparent with myself, like fully, what is going on here, Lisa? What's this about? Is this a physical thing, a psychological thing? And if you don't know, then where do you go to get
Yeah.
the answer, right? So that's me getting really up close and personal with myself around what's going on, and then thinking about how I guide my leaders, the leaders I coach, to become more vulnerable so they can lead at a higher level. And of course, you know me with my Brene Brown, my love affair with Brene Brown, you know, amazing researcher, storyteller extraordinaire. I had to go take a look at what Brene, to remind myself. I'm always in her work, but to remind myself. And she says, and these are her words, vulnerability is about the willingness to show up and be seen,
Ooh.
right? Ooh. And most of us like to be seen well, in a good light. Like, take the picture on this side so you get my better
Mm-hmm.
profile. Look at
Mm-hmm.
this piece of my work. It's my best work I've done, right? We don't want to be seen with or faults or frailties. I covered my whatever blotches here so you're not seeing it. I don't want you to
Mm-hmm.
see all that stuff, right? But when she
Yeah.
talks about showing up and be seen, she's talking about being comfortably in yourself to be able to be seen fully. Yikes. That's a
Yeah.
scary thing, right?
No filters. I don't
Yikes.
get any filters.
Yikes.
No touch ups.
Yikes. I
Yeah.
know, right? And she says one of the paradoxes of vulnerability is that vulnerability is courage of you, courage of you, but weakness of me.
Oh,
What do you mean by that? When I meet you, one of the things I want most from you in order for us to connect is I'd like for you to be vulnerable.
mm-hmm.
Don't we want that from folks? We like folks who they don't mind, making a little joke about themselves or, saying, um, um, not covering everything up too much, just being real. We like that. We say that person is authentic,
Yeah.
right? So we want
Transparent.
that.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. Yet, that's the last thing that we want to show others.
Mm-hmm.
We want that from them, but for us, we're like, I got to get to know you first before you can see my flaws, right? We got to
Mm-hmm.
trust that person before we can expose ourselves. And so Brene says it takes courage to be fully seen.
So courage by me,
Yeah,
vulnerability from you.
yeah. Because if I put myself out there enough, Mandy, I'm going to fail.
And then
If
other people will see it.
if I put myself out there enough, I'm going to fail. And then you're going to see that, well, that Lisa, she's not so smart after all.
Yep.
She's
Yep.
not so perfect after all. She doesn't have everything together after all. Well, that's such a burden to bear that I don't even want to have that on me, that I have it all together. Not at all. Right? So
Yeah.
Brene's take on it is the courage to put ourselves out there, to fail, and to deal with the emotional discomfort, even the ridicule, the laughter, the shame that comes from failing. And that's a really scary thing to do. Yet it's one of the most courageous and loving things we can do for ourselves.
Yeah. That really resonates with a lot of what I'm hearing from coworkers and colleagues. And
Mhm.
we had someone speak at our conference last week or 2 weeks ago from the U.S. Department of the Interior, and he's the
Mhm.
Attorney General, or sorry, Inspector General, Inspector General.
Mhm.
So he leads hundreds of people, and he led them through the pandemic, right? And when the pandemic, the elections, the everything was going on. And he said, one of his big lessons learned that he shared was um, letting people see your mistakes
Yeah.
and letting them know it's okay for them to make mistakes.
Yeah.
Because the pressure to be flawless
Yes.
is, it doesn't work.
We
It's
eat you alive.
counterproductive. It's counterproductive. And you know, I'm still in my young parenting days, or I know you're still a parent, obviously, but,
Mhm.
for myself growing up, there was an expectation of the, the courageous part was not
Mhm.
really there. And
Mhm.
I'll compare it to, we went to church on Sunday, and no matter what happened in that car, you step out of
Oh,
that car, you walk into that building with a smile on your face.
oh, girl,
Yeah.
been
And
there, done
you,
that.
yeah, you act like this family is hard as nails. We got it together. Everybody's happy. And then when you step back in that car
Yeah,
to go home, then you can
yes,
talk about it.
absolutely. This family is perfect.
Yeah.
Been there,
Yeah.
done that. Been
Yeah.
there. Peter and I have had like intense argument in the car. We're dressed to the nth, the ninth, going to church. Intense argument. And you pull up in that parking lot and you throw your shoulder back and fluff your
Mm-hmm.
hair and and you just smile as if everything is okay.
Mm-hmm.
And inside you're like, yeah,
Yeah.
because that's what's expected, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Mm.
And so I remember going to my daughter's kindergarten parent
Mm-hmm.
teacher conference. And this was a
Mm-hmm.
huge wake up call for me. And she said, your daughter is really hard on herself when
Yeah.
she makes a mistake and she won't try something. So she won't try it, unless she knows she can do it. And I really need her to start trying because
Yeah.
that's how you learn. You have to
Yeah.
practice your ABCs to know your ABCs. You have to write them down. You have to
Yes.
fail. You have to write them incorrectly.
Yeah.
And I said, well, how can I help? What can I do? And she said, it'd be really helpful if you and your husband talked about when you made mistakes
Yeah.
and when you fail at something in real time. And I immediately was like, what? I don't,
Talking about.
I don't make mistakes. And that
Yeah.
was a huge turning point because
Yeah.
she needed to see me fail. I needed to
Yes.
let her fail.
Yes.
And she had to be vulnerable. She had to
Yes.
go into that classroom vulnerable
Yeah.
because she had to practice.
Yes.
She can't wake up and be a star
Yes.
softball player.
Doesn't
I
work.
can't go to work and be a star performer in a new role day one. That's just not
Mm-mm.
how it works.
Mm-mm. Doesn't work. And when we set ourselves up with that sort of mentality, then we are setting ourselves up for bigger failure, that
Mm-hmm.
we've got to be perfect and that failure isn't an option, and all of that, So I joked about, Peter and I arguing and then stepping out for church, looking like the perfect couple, the perfect family. One of the most amazing things that's happened to us over the years that's got us out of that place is the willingness to show others the mess in our family and in
Yeah.
our relationship as a couple. And so he and I, we facilitate this couples group um, selfishly, really, to work on our marriage. But we've been fortunate over the last, 17 years or so, to have other couples along the way with us. We've had couples who've been with us since we started that couples group 17 years ago. And we still meet twice a month, even virtually right now. And so what we do is we put the mess out there. Now, at first, Mark, because they knew us as the couple with the bow on top, like
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
it was really hard at first to kind of be naked and vulnerable and put stuff out there. But over time, the benefits of that in learning about ourselves and about each other and about our relationship, our family, and what makes relationships really work and thrive, oh my gosh, it far outweighs the
Mm-hmm.
shame that we feel sometimes talking about stuff that's shameful, that's heavy, that's hard, and the pride we feel in seeing other couples say, oh my gosh, so we're not the only ones dealing with this. Thank you guys so much for talking about that. So
Yeah.
vulnerability is not just a gift that we give ourselves, it's such an amazing gift that we give to others,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, for sure. And I think it's one of those things that's contagious, right?
Yes.
Um, you
Yeah.
you present that and you get that in return. It's just like you and I's relationship. You
Mhm.
know, um, we've seen each other maybe 3 times, maybe like 3 times face to face, but
Yeah.
you and I come to every time we've seen each other with a little bit of vulnerability that I'm gonna kind of be myself with her.
Yeah.
I'm gonna let this
Yeah.
guard down. I'm gonna be willing to grow and learn. And
Mhm.
what we've received in return has been this amazing
Yeah.
relationship, really only able to thrive because we
Yeah.
both walk in the door,
Yes.
very humble and
Yes.
very and I will say I have I'm able to present that to you, and that's something that is difficult for me to walk into a room with my husband sometimes, or my
Yeah.
colleagues I've known for 11 years and
And say
walk in
that.
humble every single time
Yeah.
because you build some armor, right? you've got past experiences, you
Yeah.
have fear of being judged, of being wrong. And I think, you know, really telling myself to walk into every room or every
Mhm.
meeting with that humility and with that vulnerability is something I have to continue to work on, and what I've really been trying to work on.
Yeah.
And um, so the week of our conference, we actually went out to happy hour after work one
Mhm.
day, and I walked into that happy hour completely stressed out. I was exhausted. I had a year and a half worth of resentment built up around some
Mhm.
things that had happened.
Yeah.
And I will tell you, the person I showed up as that night was not a person I wanted to show up as.
Mm.
And I was not vulnerable. I had on
Mhm.
heavy armor. I was
Mhm.
ready to pounce.
Mhm.
And I'll tell you where the vulnerability came out was the next day when I had to eat my words and
Mm.
sit down and apologize to somebody very dear to me for the way I showed up.
Showed up. Yeah.
And I had a quick realization. I'm telling you, it's in this discomfort that I've been
Yeah.
having that I learned how I do want to show up.
Yeah. And it's the word discomfort sounds like this ugly thing, and yet it's an amazingly beautiful crucible for us to learn and grow. Getting familiar with the discomfort of vulnerability is one of the ways to become more vulnerable. So we get used to the physiological sensation of when we're feeling ashamed or angry or sad or sorry for something we said or did or didn't do. And we get used to what does that feel like? When we get used to that physical sensation, we then can label the emotions attached to it really well. When we do that, we then can manage that well. How do we now respond to these emotions to manage them so they don't get in the way of us engaging with others? Because when they get in the way of us engaging with others, we damage trust, we disrupt connections with others. And what does that do? That impacts our ability to flourish. Because remember, one of those components of
Mm-hmm.
flourishing is those meaningful, strong, healthy connections that we have.
Yeah.
So this whole vulnerability thing, the return on investment in leaning into it, understanding it, and managing it well is so amazing. I was thinking of one of the leaders I work with, and I've had the really honor and privilege of working with her for the last almost 3 years now and watching her grow. And I'm growing with her as a result of my work with her, which is, I can't tell you how beautiful that kind of experience is. And talk about vulnerability. Oh, she ain't got none of that. That's not something she wanted to be involved with at all. Her people need to know the guidelines, do the work, and da 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 da. And over the last 2 years or so, I have watched her take off her facade, this armor that she wore that prevented her from connecting with her people and from nourishing them and nurturing them and growing them, to becoming this amazingly strong driver as she's always been, but a driver who cares for her people. And a huge part of it is her being able to say, I messed up on that, I made a mistake, I'm sorry about this, I'm having this personal stuff that I'm dealing with that's kind of impacting my ability to do work right now. And that one shift, and it was a major shift that took her a while, made a world of difference for her in terms of the impact on her team, their productivity, their well being, and her own well being.
Yeah.
Amazing
I
shift.
I recently read an article about um, you know, research shows that managers, directors, executives are quicker to say, I'm sorry about a task or a business related decision or project
Yeah.
than they are about a personal, relational type mistake that they might have made, which I thought was fascinating because we are all very quick to say, oh my gosh, I sent you the wrong document.
Yeah.
Or I sent an
Yeah.
email without an attachment, which I'm sad to say,
Yeah.
the older I get, the more I do that. We are very quick to say we're sorry about that, but it's so much harder for us to say, I'm really sorry how I talked to you in that meeting.
Yes.
I'm really
Yes.
sorry that I stepped on your toes. I'm
Yeah.
sorry that I cut you off. Or, and
Yeah.
I thought that was fascinating.
Yeah. And when we see that happening, it's usually from a leader who has an enormous amount of empathy, which is something that they've worked on over time. So they get to feel what you might be feeling when they make a misstep. And they're
Mhm.
willing to address that as quickly as possible because they don't want you feeling the hurt that you can feel as a result of that. You know,
Yeah.
as I'm watching you and listening to you talk about that, a colleague said to me last week that listening to the podcast, they relate so much to you. Like, oh my gosh, she said, I feel like I'm Mandy and Mandy's me. The personality, the stories she tells, the way she presents her stuff, and you are making her see some stuff in herself that she needs to rethink.
Mm.
And I'm like, oh my gosh, I've got to tell Mandy that.
I mean, that makes it all worth it, right?
Yeah, makes it all worth it.
So
So
we've
vulnerability,
got about 5 minutes. I
yeah,
want us, we got to give people some tips
yeah,
on being
yeah.
vulnerable.
Well, the first thing, I want to say is, vulnerability sounds like a big, scary word, and it really isn't. But the big scariness might come from how we've heard the word used in the past, where for a lot of people, vulnerability is about being weak, it's about showing flaws. And, as I shared earlier from Brene Brown, that's not what it is at all. It's an act of courage, to demonstrate it to yourself and others. And it starts with simple things like, being vulnerable enough, if we want to start building vulnerability, being willing to set boundaries with our colleagues or friends or family members, for example. That's strengthening our vulnerability. It's an act of courage to say, I won't be able to take phone calls after such a time in the evenings,
Mhm.
or I'm not available for the weekend to respond to such and such. It's vulnerable to do that because someone may take offense to it, but we start with those little things. It's sharing something personal about yourself that you normally wouldn't, and you put it out there and see what comes, and you sort of strengthen yourself to respond to whatever comes appropriately. It's saying to somebody who's hurt you that that was very hurtful, or however you want to share that with them, but taking those risks, stepping outside of your comfort zone to doing things that you wouldn't normally do. It's the person who, after divorce, take the risk to start new relationships, not knowing what. I have a girlfriend going through this right now where she's online and it is the scariest thing for her. Never done this before, but she has to do this as a way to strengthen herself and to make sure that her life is as fulfilling. So let me give you a few tips that I've put together. Number one is I say, you know what? Make the decision to be vulnerable. It's a decision we make that we're going to think a certain way and behave a certain way, and then move on with that decision, knowing that there's going to be some embarrassment. There might be even some feelings of shame that comes with it, but that's the decision that you have made. Then once you've done that, get to know yourself better. Know, for example, the things that makes you feel good about yourself, that gets you in a place where you can contemplate, process, and make decisions. So whether that's listening to music, soaking in your bathtub, going for a walk, gardening, you name it, get to know yourself well in those settings that allows you to think clearly and process about what it is that you want to do, the things that you need to do, and how you're going to push yourself a little further. And then number three, figure out what vulnerability means to you, not to somebody else, right? For some people, vulnerability might mean signing up for this, dance lesson or improv class. For other folks, no, that's normal. For another person, vulnerability is climbing Mount Kilimanjaro.
Yeah.
That's my
Yeah,
kind of
no big
jam.
deal.
That's my kind of jam, right? But figure out what vulnerability means for you. For some people, it might be weakness. For you, you've got to figure it out. If, for example, your family of origin, vulnerability was seen as weakness, then you've got quite a bit of mindset work and perhaps even some therapy to work through that and rebuild your stories. Throw out perhaps some of those stories and rewrite your stories around vulnerability. And then we talked about this a bit before, which is getting familiar what vulnerability feels like for you. Where does it sit in your body? Physically, what are you feeling? And emotionally, how are you labeling that? Because when we name things correctly, we can manage them more effectively. We acknowledge them, we name them, we can manage them. And then the last one, number 5, is challenge yourself. Push yourself outside your comfort zone. Do that thing that you thought you would never do normally. But because, remember, number 1 was I made the decision to be vulnerable. I made that decision, and my brain stands ready to help me see that through. So figure out those things, those places, those people that you need to approach to get out of your comfort zone, do something different, something that will stretch you, something that you can actually measure and see that I'm this farther along the road than I was before I started doing this. So those are some, if all of us follow those 5 guidelines, those 5 tips, we're going to be way farther down the road on vulnerability that allows us to flourish, because that's a connection we want to make. The more vulnerable we become, the more courageous we are with ourselves, the more authentic we will be, and the more likely we are to flourish despite the challenges that we're facing.
And I have to say, since our last podcast, in almost every situation I've been in these past few weeks, and you and I have had some health, our families had health issues. We've had work challenges. I just had a huge conference. You know, you've got your schedule, you've got your sleep you're dealing with. It has been amazing to remind myself I'm still flourishing.
Yes.
I'm having this thing right now, but
Yes.
I'm still flourishing.
Yes.
I mean, I fell on my ass, you know, with my family. I took a horrible fall. Everything hurt when I was camping with them.
Yeah.
But it was an amazing trip, and you go to the doctor and you get it fixed, you know, but and that's of course very literal, but it's such an awesome reminder to say, you know what, this is not all of me.
Yes. Yeah, I had to, a couple of weeks ago, I had to send an email to my book editor to say, Gail, I'm struggling right now, keeping all the balls in the air. And I shared with her my health stuff that I'm going through. And I said, my brain can't do the work around editing. Mandy, that was very hard for me to do. And here's what pushed me to do that quickly. I think it was also affecting my ability to get the little sleep I was actually getting, because I was so worried about. And once I was able to send that email off to Gail, the relief I felt of, okay, I'm going to get this done. But right now, I just can't.
Yeah. Yeah. And that was your boundary. And that's
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, it's hard to say, especially to say no, or to say not right now to something you're very passionate about. But you know, you have to do
what you got to do. Have to do what you got to do.
So
let's be vulnerable, Mandy.
I know. I almost want to say everyone needs to be vulnerable to being vulnerable.
I love that. Let's be vulnerable to be vulnerable.
But I want to ask everyone, you know, I want everyone to think about those 5 things. But I want to encourage everyone to, my sister-in-law was visiting from California, and she told me that she went to this advanced jazz class just for fun, and just to, you know, see what it's like, and just because she wanted to be uncomfortable. She wanted to try something different, and she recorded herself. And and I mean, she just wanted to kind of feel that vulnerability and see what she could do. And she made it through. She didn't leave. And so I want to challenge everyone listening, and even you and I want us to do something completely out of our comfort zone. And it could be little, it could be big, you know.
What will that be?
I know. And maybe mine is going to like a hip hop class and just, you know, living it up. Because I've always wanted to dance or sing, you know, and I can't do both.
Yeah. Oh.
So think about it.
I gotta figure out what mine is. I have an on-screen interview coming up, which is a big deal in a week and a half from now. And it's making me nervous. I know
that's great.
I'm not nervous about those things, but that somehow has gotten me a bit nervous, especially because of the person who's interviewing me. And I'm like, crap, Lisa, what's going on? Why are you shaking in your boots? But
that's good. That means you care.
Yes, I'm shaking in my boots a little bit.
Yeah. Oh, that's awesome. Well, this is always, I mean, exactly what I needed to start my vacation.
Well,
So
you
now
have
I'll go
fun.
to New Orleans. You know what I'll do?
What?
Just for you,
What?
I will sing a brand new song at karaoke in New Orleans.
Ooh, that's awesome.
And I'll tell you next time what the song is that I choose.
Huh.
Yeah.
Looking forward to it. Well, if I can, I'm trying to figure out how things are going to flow at Chris's party. I'll probably do some dancing. Not sure.
Oh.
This is all young folks. So Peter and I will be the old fogies, and I don't think we will be allowed to stay for the late part of the real party. So we will. So I have to figure this out well. Will I be embarrassing her by dancing, or will this be to say I'm being vulnerable no matter what happens? We'll see.
Oh, I can't wait to hear that.
Old
Well,
fogies
this
coming to
has
the
been
party.
awesome. Thank
Uh,
you. And thank you all for listening. And I am adding this part in this time just for my mother. Mom, podcasts, you can find them wherever you listen to your podcasts. And mom, you listen to it on Apple. And to make sure you can listen to all of them, you find it and you press subscribe. So that was just for my mother who has no idea how podcasts work. And she thinks she has to tune in live every time we do this. So that was just for you, mom. And for everyone else listening, please press subscribe so that you get our newest episodes. And thank you all for listening today.
I love it. Mandy's mom, thanks for listening. Thanks, everybody. Bye for now.
Bye.